John Croy, Cranston, Jack Braun, Captain Flint, Brain Trust, Earl Sanderson, Silver Helix, Chop Chop, Young Troll, Stopwatch, Will-O-Wisp, Turtle, and Xavier Desmond.
Hello, welcome to Card Table. I was looking at the Wild Cards World, the wildcardsworld.com website. I thought about this for a while because one of the things they have on the website, if you click over to books and then you go down, there's cover gallery, and you can see it's not complete. I'm pretty sure there are some covers that I've seen out there in the wild, as Ed Piskor would say, that I don't think I see on this website. So I think there are more covers than what they have. But it's a pretty comprehensive, if not 100% comprehensive, collection of images and cover artwork for all the different editions of the Wild Cards books. And so I thought, particularly, at least for the early ones, looking, let's say we can go up to say 8. Going up to volume 8, after that, there starts to be, it feels like fewer and fewer different covers. But for the first 8 editions, there's a lot of different things to choose from. So I thought, what about just a video where I just choose my favorite cover for each of the first 8 books. What I'd love is for you to all comment and say some of your favorite covers. See how we feel about the different cover artwork that exists. I will say in general, I think that the Michael Comark covers, just as pieces of artwork, are overall the strongest. I mean, just really beautiful illustrations. Looking at the Michael Comark covers, I've thought to myself, if he was selling these as like prints, like poster-sized prints, there's several that I would frame and put on my walls just as conversation pieces. And without the trade dress would be better, without the, George R.R. Martin Wild Cards title stuff, all that stripped away. In the world where I'm a wealthy person who can spend money on frivolous things, I would maybe contact Mr. Comark and say, hey, let's how about we do this, because this is the kind of artwork I want to hang up in my new mansion. But going more sort of on an individual basis, I'm not just going to always pick the Michael Comark cover as I go through the first 8 volumes, just to not be boring, even though generally speaking, as works of art, I think they really do kind of stand apart. For today, let's just look at more, I'm thinking more just looking at it from the perspective of it's a combination of things, like, the artwork itself, how well it conveys the contents of the book, maybe my own personal relationship to it based on, which edition I first read or first bought or whatever. So there'll be some nostalgia, mixed in, maybe, based on which characters are featured, if it features a character I particularly like. All that stuff will be factored in, so I'm not just saying, oh, Michael Comark. Starting with volume 1, I think my personal favorite, I'm going to go with what, according to wildcardsworld.com, is the 1989 British edition from Titan, featuring cover art by Brian Bolland. Brian Bolland, of course, is an artist that, ever since I first read The Killing Joke, probably in 1989, the same year that this British edition came out, I think is probably when I read The Killing Joke, after being excited by the Michael Keaton movie, that amazing cover with the Joker. I think after seeing Jack Nicholson as the Joker, I really wanted to read some Joker comics, and that one just kind of blew me away as a young child. So I've always been a big fan of Brian Bolland. So after loving his Joker comic, here's a cover featuring kind of a similar motif. I mean, The Killing Joke, because it was the Joker, had kind of a playing card motif to some of its design elements, and maybe that's why he was tapped for this. You got that playing card motif, some Jokers and some Aces, held by Dr. Tachyon. Dr. Tachyon features in a lot of Wild Cards covers, particularly volume 1. And I think this particular rendition of Tachyon gets across the flamboyant dress, the flowing red hair that they often talk about as being almost like metallic red. I think Bolland captures that element. The playing card motif is great. Even the black stripe down the side kind of works for me. For volume 2, I'm going to go with what they say is the Bantam Paperback US edition, 1987. So I think this is the first paperback that Bantam put out, because Bantam reissued it in 1990. The 1990 reissue is actually the first one that I am familiar with. Pretty cool one. Not really accurate. I mean, the swarm that Modular Man is fighting there doesn't really quite look like the swarm to me. Modular Man himself is supposed to be able to pass as human, and Tim Truman makes him look very robotic. That face, the neck, he really looks like a robot, and he's really not supposed to. That said, as my favorite, I'm going to go with the US 1987 paperback edition. So I really love this version of the logo, which I guess is the original, Bantam's original logo. Well, I'm more familiar with the one, this one's got that slant. I'm more familiar with the one that goes straight across. You know, the metallic sheen, the eye dotted with a spade is great. I can't remember who, maybe it was someone like Nick Hornby, talking about how when you were young and you'd buy like albums by your favorite bands, you'd sort of stare at the album art. All these little details of it were kind of emblazoned in your memory. Certainly something like this Wildcards logo is emblazoned in mine, like just staring at this logo and all the little details of it from when I was a teenager. This particular edition of Aces High, it's not maybe not the best piece of art in the world. And in fact, Modular Man looks even more like somebody who couldn't pass as human with his silver head. But what I like about this is that it does kind of establish one of the things I love about Aces High is that it's got this sort of everything but the kitchen sink. There's aliens attacking, there's androids, body snatching type stuff, there's obviously the aces and jokers themselves, giant gorilla, doing a riff on King Kong, climbing the Empire State Building. There's the magic bowling ball that can teleport people across the stars, the giant piece of yeast in space, the anthropomorphic grasshopper corpse that is chased around in this kind of farcical story by Zelazny. It's just, there's so much, and yet it all kind of works. It seems like on the surface like it would just be overpacked when you think about all the elements that it includes. How can it possibly all be shoved into I didn't even mention like the Masonic cult worshiping this old evil goddess Tiamat. It sounds like too much for one book, but then when you read it, it just all fits together in this beautiful way. I thought this cover was kind of the best sort of expression of that in a way. It's a little bit colorformy, like whoever put that, I don't know the name of this artist, but, just kind of has his cityscape and then just kind of sticks Modular Man on there, sticks a flying saucer on there, sticks a kind of sort of peregrine figure, yellow peregrine, although I don't know if that's for sure that's who it's supposed to be. Gets the great ape there on the Empire State Building, gets Tachyon in the front in a kind of ringleader sort of pose. Just everything kind of pasted on in this sort of like colorformy collage, but to me kind of speaks to, this sort of everything but the kitchen sink philosophy of this book, and it's an element of the book that I really like. So that's my pick for volume 2. Honorable mention for the 1987 SciFi Club hardcover. It almost seems like they took like a still from King Kong and traced it, at least for the face of the great ape in this sci-fi hardcover edition. And of course, this is the version that has Modular Man's butt. Almost all the same elements, like maybe one artist was peeking over the other's shoulder, because it's the same stuff, right? It's the flying saucer, it's the winged woman, it's the android, it's the great ape. Yeah, honorable mention to it. For volume 3, I'm going with the 1990 reissue of the Bantam trade paperback illustrated by Tim Truman. One of the things I like about this, I love the cityscape in the background. It looks almost like it was drawn freehand. I'm not an artist myself, but I do know a little bit about perspective grids, and doesn't that cityscape look just a little bit off? Like maybe he just drew it freehand. Like if you were to trace the vanishing point, trace it all back to the vanishing point, the lines would not converge. I'm not sure, but I like that element of it. I like that it's kind of feels a little more freehand. I like that cool blue, shades of blue for the cityscape, especially against that kind of burgundy. That works nicely, and it kind of matches up with the dresses of the two women. I think if you read the actual prose, I don't think Peregrine's dress is described like this, and I think Water Lily, I feel like they specifically say that Water Lily's dress is green or something, so to put her in pink. So not literally correct, granted, but one thing that I really love about this cover, this is a scene that sort of happens off camera, and obviously with prose, it's not a visual medium, so everything's off camera. Everything's just kind of unfolding in your mind's eye. But as I've mentioned many times in other videos, it's third person limited. So much of Wildcard's narration is third person limited, particularly in these mosaics, the braided narratives like volume 3. So you're seeing things specifically through the eyes of one character at a time. And this particular moment, I believe, is during a Fortunato sequence. They're at the top of the restaurant on the Empire State Building, Aces High, and Fortunato sees Water Lily be pushed over the edge. Peregrine, the winged ace, who's sort of an icon of Wildcards, just goes diving over the edge to save her, and they're both out of sight. From Fortunato's point of view, he doesn't see what happens next. So this moment, the moment when she basically, of Peregrine catching Lily and rescuing her, is not on screen. And I love that Tim Truman chose a moment like that for the cover, illustrating a moment that isn't actually described in the prose, and yet is very much a part of the story. There's probably a word for it. I don't know what that word is, but I really like that about this particular cover. For volume 4, I am going with the SciFi Club hardcover. This one captures up an element of wild cards that I really like. It's one of the things that I find appealing about it, which is it takes place in, the real world, the present day. It's sort of like a comic book world, but given a more kind of gritty reality. But it's also got elements of fantasy, because one of the elements of the wild cards virus that was so brilliantly sort of baked into the premise at the start was that people's minds can kind of on this sort of psychokinetic, telekinetic level, can sort of recreate the rules of reality, adjust reality even at the atomic level to make it what they want, which is why something like a giant King Kong ape can exist in the wild cards world, even though I think physics is not my strong suit. But as I understand it, there's like a physical reason why a gorilla can never grow to be that large. They can never have like a giant animal that large. Something to do with the square cube law or something. But in the wild cards universe, it's possible, because the wild cards virus unleashes the potential of the human mind to manipulate reality and literally change the laws of physics. So anything can happen. And that means that not only can you get people with superhuman powers, but you can get, there could be werewolves, there could be vampires. As this cover kind of implies, there can be manifestations of like the old Egyptian gods. There can be humans who have the head of a dog or the head of a cat or the head of a bird. Egyptian gods come to life, but it's still in a present-day context. So you've got these, what seems to be an Egyptian temple, hieroglyphics in the background, these animal-headed beings. So it all looks like something out of ancient Egyptian mythology, except they're in, camouflage and ammo clips on their belts. They're hefting these machine guns and firing machine guns. And that contradiction between the sort of the fantastical and the sort of present day reality, the fact that you can have Egyptian gods, characters that look like they stepped out of a time thousands of years in the past, but holding very modern weaponry and firing these modern day machine guns. That weird contradiction and that juxtaposition is great, and one of the things I find very appealing about wild cards. This is one of those covers that kind of captures up that aspect. For volume 5, this Michael Comarch cover that has, from what I can tell, not one, not two, but at least 3 kitty cats on the cover, since my mom and I are both cat people. Vagabond, she's a character who at this point in the timeline when volume 5 takes place, she's, I want to say she is maybe 32 or something like that. She's a young woman. It's implied that she's actually quite a young, attractive, beautiful woman, kind of in her prime, but she is uncomfortable in the world of humans. And so in order to keep humans away from her, she sort of acts the part of a, 60-year-old, 70-year-old homeless vagrant, and most people don't get close enough to see. And I think all of that is really kind of captured up. And if you look at her face in this Michael Comarch illustration, and then of course she's got her 2 favorite cats, the calico and the black, and both of those cats are there with their glowing green eyes. I love that she's in this dark tunnel, but the sun is kind of shining through, and you can see the light rays kind of causing the kitty cat's eyes to glow, and you can see what I think is the word freak illuminated by the sun, like there's graffiti in these subway tunnels. Yeah, so many beautiful details in the Comarch covers, and none of the previous illustrations of Vagabond ever got her quite right, whereas this really is a nice rendering of that character and really makes you want to read about her. Plus, it's kitty cats, and you gotta love kitty cats. Now, volume 6, the evil politician Greg Hartman is only one of 6 characters, but every cover of volume 6 seems to really like to focus on Hartman. And for that reason, I think I'm going to go with Comarch again. I think Comarch's cover just really stands out. The other thing that you see on a lot of other covers for Volume 6, since the whole idea with Greg Hartman is that he's running for president. So, of course, a lot of like patriotic imagery, a lot of red, white, and blue. So Comarch's cover takes some of those elements that we've seen in previous covers for editions of Volume 6 and says, okay, we'll get a campaign poster, a Greg Hartman campaign poster on the wall, and we'll definitely get some red, white, and blue in there, but shifting the focus to a different character. Greg Hartman has this sort of evil presence inside him that he sort of has compartmentalized and made into its own persona that he calls Puppet Man. And if you look at like the Brian Bolland cover for Volume 6, he actually kind of literalizes the Puppet Man, draws a little demon kind of hovering near Hartman's midsection. But there's an external evil that Hartman uses. Basically, his favorite puppet is the character of Mackie Messer, who's this psychopathic, murderous ace, just a completely sick, vile character. Comarc takes all of that and puts it into this great cover where instead of seeing Greg Hartman's face on that poster, we see Mackie Messer phasing right through the wall, right where Greg Hartman's face is on that poster. A great way to illustrate that sort of metaphor of Greg Hartman is this politician who outwardly seems like one of the good ones, right? Like one of the politicians who believes in all the right things and says all the right things and really is out there to help the people. But inside he has this evil. Comarc kind of literalizes that by having this sort of evil figure emerge from Hartman's poster in a way that makes literal sense within the story because the character actually can literally phase through things. But in this case, it also takes on this metaphorical layer of him emerging from Hartman's image, putting this utterly perverse spin on the red, white, and blue color scheme. Pale white arms covered in the red blood as he faces through the blue of the poster. A great way of kind of creating this sort of visual metaphor that isn't subtle or anything, but it is very evocative while still playing within the rules of the Wildcards world, where this is something that you could actually see literally happen. So it's metaphorical, but it's also literal. It sort of dodges the bullet of Comarc looking at it and going, oh, am I just going to do yet another cover with Greg Hartman in the same way that so many previous editions have already done? He finds a way to kind of avoid the cliche and still have Greg Hartman on the cover. I mean, his literal name is right there, and yet also make it not Greg Hartman on the cover. Volume 7, I'm a little disappointed in Comarc's cover. I think Yeoman looks perfect. The bow and arrow looks great. I think everything about Yeoman, the bows and the quivers, the hood over his face. But Jay Aykroyd kind of disappoints me. I'm glad Jay is on the cover because he's such a favorite character of mine, one of my top Wildcards characters. It's great to see him on the cover. He's got his classic point going on, but someone else pointed this out. I can't remember where or when. He's got a little bit of a John Travolta face going on, which when you combine it with that outstretched arm pointing, makes you think of like the Saturday Night Fever disco pose, doesn't it? It's hard to unsee, isn't it, when you see that? But still, I still dig it, and I still think it's the superior cover. I think I said I was only going to go up to volume 8. I decided to go for a dark horse. The original cover by Tim Truman and then the new cover from Tor both have chosen the Oddity as the character. Pretty much they just chose the exact same moment, the Oddity sort of fighting off some young toughs. You can definitely see where Tim Truman kind of falls short when you put them side by side, because the new version, like, that's the Oddity. I mean, that the Oddity are always meant to be this sort of just frighteningly massive being. I think that's captured pretty well in this cover. So I do like this one a lot, but I am going to go with, this is the Russian edition from 2016. It's got Cody Havero on the cover. It's got the playing card motif, which I quite like. And Cody Havero, I decided to go with this one because she's Chris Claremont's contribution to the Wildcards universe, and I'm a big, huge Chris Claremont fan, of course. Claremont, he's got his certain, what they call the Claremont cliches, and he's got his character Callisto, who wears an eye patch, and so Callisto being from Claremont's X-Men. Another classic Claremont X-Men character is Rogue, and one of her most iconic elements of her visual is the brown hair with the white stripe. And so Cody gets a little bit of that going on too. So she's got, so I like how she just looks like a Claremont character, at least from the neck up. I think she's a little too romance novel-y from the neck down. Pretty sure that's meant to be Blaze in the background. He looks suitably douchebaggy. I think he looks just right. Just like got a face that you just kind of want to punch, which is very much true of the character Blaze, particularly in Volume 8. The astral look of him, again, very Claremont touch, that sort of astral image, even though Blaze is a Melinda Snodgrass character. But there was some kind of charity auction where the Wildcards authors were selling things. So even though I can't read a word of this, I thought it's just such a cool artifact. I thought I'd just pick it up. One of the reasons I decided to choose this as my favorite cover is I actually do have a physical copy of this one, and even though, like I said, the text is not something that I will ever in my lifetime learn how to read, probably, but it's still pretty darn cool looking. So we'll stop there. So yeah, maybe at some point I'll go back and do 9 through 33. I don't know if it's worth it with some of the books there's only 2 covers to choose from. By all means, feel free to comment which covers you particularly dig. Part of the point of Wildcards is that it's prose, even though it's these comic book tropes but rendered in prose, so it's not really The visuals are not that important to wild cards, and they also say don't judge a book by its cover, but we all do, let's face it. Or at the very least, we judge covers by the books, right? So yeah, let's talk about it, and I'll see you next time.
So my honey and me go to a counselor to try and give our love back some sparks. He said, we'll get your love growing, but before we get going, may I highly recommend Cod Shocks? I like to go out dancing. My baby loves a bunch of authors. Lately we've had some friction, cause my baby's hooked on shared world fiction.